All of the propellants on board both ships, about 45 minutes or so before launch, they kind of stagger where we start with ship and then move into booster. We're going to continue loading these propellants on board until just about 3 minutes before liftoff. We'll close out on the ship first and then on the booster. But bottom line, everything's looking great. Not tracking any vehicle issues, range issues, weather issues. We're looking really good right now for a launch at the top of our window right at 6:30 p.m. Central.
Yeah, seeing the propellant loading is making this getting more and more exciting. Today is going to be a wild ride for Super Heavy. We're putting the booster through several tests to expand the envelope on its capabilities and get flight data to make its return and catch more reliable. Now, another unique change in today's flight will be the addition of the first ever directional flip of the booster.
That's right. If you followed previous flights and you kind of wonder to yourself, why does the direction of the booster flip seem random? Surprise, it's because it was. We've got a couple of views from previous flights where you'll see the booster kind of go in different directions, and it was really small differences in the thrust of those ship engines. As they started up, they would nudge the booster in an initial direction, and so the booster would essentially sense that and then lean into it, and it'll react, the engines will gimbal, and then it'll continue the flip. That was the easiest option technically, but you do take some performance hits since you're essentially setting aside propellant to accommodate every single direction for a flip.
Exactly, but if we know which direction we're flipping, then we know how much propellant we will need and can instead use more of the propellant to burn longer during ascent, adding more velocity to ship and increasing how much payload it can ultimately deliver to space.
Yeah, so today I got my trusty Super Heavy here. We're going to intentionally try to flip straight up. So as you're separating from the ship, we want to get to here as you're doing that boost back burn. The fastest way is to just flip straight up and go into it. That's roughly what we did on Flight 5. It's the most direct way to get into that orientation for the boost back burn. What you don't want to do is when you flip all the way down like that, we did that on Flight 7, it takes you in a big loop, uses the most amount of prop, not efficient. We're at the point where we want to start kind of tuning it in and getting some extra performance out of the booster.
Yeah, exactly. That's called optimization.
That's right.
To accomplish this, we made some changes to the hot stage adapter, welding reinforced panels over the vents in the direction that we want the booster to go. So when the ship engines ignite, the thrust will push against the blocked vents, which means that the nudge will be in the direction that we planned for. And then when we go to the next generation of ship and booster, we plan to control the flip direction by fine-tuning the engine startup sequence on the ship.
Yeah, that's not the only flight experiment that we have planned for the booster today. We're not attempting a catch, so we're going to try and gather additional data that's going to improve performance on future boosters. We're also going to try and see how resilient we are to things like losing an engine during the landing burn. By sending the booster out to sea, we're able to do these higher risk tests without risking the launch pad. As you might have heard earlier, we're going to be doing what's called a higher angle of attack. Basically, instead of coming straight down, we're going to tilt up a little bit. That gets you more drag on the booster. You're able to use just aerodynamic forces to slow you down. The slower you're going at the start of that landing burn, the less propellant you need, because really you're just focused on slowing down as much as humanly possible when you fire that up. So by already going a little bit slower, we'll get some benefits to our performance and our reliability on those burns.
Yeah, exactly. And there's definite uncertainty in how well the booster's grid fins and structure will be able to control its flight when we get into higher angles. So don't be surprised if it isn't a smooth descent for the booster down to its splashdown point today. The most important objective of this portion of the test will be getting actual flight data to help anchor our models. Now, we're hoping to fly the next generation of super heavy boosters at even higher angles of attack. So this test today will give us a better idea of what is feasible. Now, on top of all of this, we're going to see how resilient Super Heavy is to engine failures at the most critical times.
Yeah, we're going to intentionally disable one of those 3 center engines and instead use an engine from the middle ring that's kind of right behind it. Those center engines are what we nominally use at the very last part of a landing burn as you're just kind of fine-tuning the booster's path into those waiting chopstick arms. This is going to act as a real-world simulation of a pretty scary situation where engines are not starting at probably the worst possible time, but we're going to do this without risking the pad. And then, at the very end of the landing burn, we're going to cut one more engine off and go down to only those 2 center engines. The burn is going to end while Super Heavy is still several hundred feet above the Gulf, so we expect it to make a pretty hard splashdown today. So, in all, pretty eventful day for the booster.
And as many of you may know, water landings are actually uncommon for SpaceX. While other launch providers expend all of their boosters after flight, we land and reuse most of ours. All of these tests are going to help us improve future generations of Super Heavy until we reach its fundamental design, a fully and rapidly reusable and reliable rocket. All right, let's check back in with Chris in Hawthorne. How's it going, Chris?
Hey, Jesse, my colleagues here in Hawthorne definitely agree with you. We can't wait to see the Super Heavy perform its second flight and see all of the work from our thousands of engineers and technicians in action today. Now, while this reuse milestone is incredibly important for Starship's development, Super Heavy boosters are not the only vehicles that we reuse here at SpaceX. We're big on reuse, and our Dragon fleet is another example of that reuse. And we actually control those Dragon missions from right here in Hawthorne in the mission control room that we talked about a little bit earlier. For Dragon and our human spaceflight program, this month also marks a big milestone for SpaceX, our 5-year anniversary of human spaceflight. Now, NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley got us started back on Demo 2, which was notable for being the first time since the retirement of the shuttle program in 2011 that people launched to orbit from U.S. soil. Now, in those 5 years, we have launched 17 human spaceflight missions, 11 for NASA, and 6 commercial missions, including Polaris Dawn, with our first commercial spacewalk in history, and From 2 earlier this year, which became the first human spaceflight mission ever to explore Earth's polar regions. We've flown a total of 66 crew in those 5 years, and we are expecting that number to grow significantly in the coming years. Now, most recently on our From 2 mission, the crew offered unique glimpses into the orbital spaceflight experience. And this was honestly just so cool to see. Thank you to our Starlink teams for making everything with the From 2 crew shared possible. This honestly made me feel like I was right there with them in Dragon. They were living, they were working, they were relaxing, they were doing their experiments while also having fun. Basically, just being people and inviting us along for the ride. And that was really meaningful. Being invited up there really showed how these are just the early days on the road to making life multiplanetary. And the vehicle that's going to make all of that happen is Starship. And Dan and Jesse, I don't know about you, but that is definitely a future I have wanted since I was a little kid, and I cannot wait to see us make it a reality.
Yeah, right there with you, Chris. It's the fact that we're getting close to that being reality, that the vehicle that's going to go is sitting on the pad right there. Like, that's endlessly exciting. All of that's going to include sending humans, all of the infrastructure for a permanent presence on Mars. And we're looking ahead to sending the very first Starships to Mars as early as next year.
Yeah, this will help prove that we can actually get to Mars with a focus on learning as much as possible while demonstrating what will be needed for Mars transit and landing. But before we can make life multiplanetary, we have to build the Starships that will make this all possible.
That's right. And that's happening right here, Starbase, Texas, the gateway to Mars. This is where we're soon going to be launching up to 25 Starship launches per year from here at Starbase. And the place is changing every single day. We've grown quite a bit just in the last couple of years. There's a couple hundred employees, their families living amongst actual rockets. We're in the process of expanding production and integration. We've got a target of 1,000 Starships a year we're going to try to hit. And recently, we did become a city of our own. We're the first city in Cameron County in 30 years. And that's just going to help us scale more quickly, try to build out the best community possible for all the people that are building the future of humanity's place in space. Starbase, pretty easily one of the most inspiring, exciting, unique places to live and work on the planet. As usual, shameless plug, we're always hiring. Come help us build the gateway to Mars. Visit SpaceX.com/careers. You can see all of our openings.
And this is my first time in Starbase. And Dan, the Star Factory is a manufacturing engineer's dream. To be able to build a factory like this at such a large scale with such a large scale vehicle is so wild to me. And though I'm just visiting, Chris is hanging out right where I call home base. So let's check back in with Chris in Hawthorne.
Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, everything here in Hawthorne is looking good. The crowd is gathered, really excited to watch the hard work of all of their colleagues come to fruition here for Starship on its 9th flight test. Not tracking any issues. We are excited to watch Starship do its thing today, make it halfway around the world, and test a lot of those critical in-space maneuvers and operations that will be vital for the program's continued operation. So, Dan and Jesse, we can't wait for liftoff. Let's have a good flight today.
Thanks, Chris. Now, if you're just now joining us, where have you been? But we're glad that you're joining us now. We are at T-minus just under 6 minutes until liftoff of the 9th Starship test flight. So far, the range is looking good. All the airspace and trajectory area that we are going to be launching through is looking good for our test flight today. Weather has been great. It was a little rainy and windy this morning, but it cleared up. It looks beautiful here in Starbase, and propellant loading continues on both stages.
All right, yeah, it is continuing. We're a little over 90% full on our booster. We are pretty much full in the main tanks on ship, filling up those header tanks. We're going to continue loading prop for about 2 more minutes. Once we're done with that, you've got just under 11 million pounds of liquid propellant spread across those 2 stages. After we get through all of that prop load, our stage 0 will get ready. The ground systems will go through pushbacks, clearing all of those fluid feed lines back to the propellant farm, getting ready for launch. We did just see they did a flap wiggle check, so the final flap check on the ship. We're doing final alignments of the guidance, navigation, and control system, our thrust vector control, essentially our steering, checkouts of the flight safety system. So everything progressing right now. If we do need to hold, that can come at T-minus 40 seconds. That's a point built into the countdown where we can pause to wait for any final checkouts, pressurizations, anything that we need to complete. We can hold there. We will only hold there if we're tracking an issue. We're not currently tracking anything that will hold us at T-minus 40 seconds. But if you've seen a Starship launch before, they can happen. We can push through them and then launch that day still.
Exactly. But when we do pass through T-minus 40 seconds, a number of events will occur in rapid succession. The ground spin and ignition systems come up to flight pressure. Ship goes to internal power, and then after that, the quick disconnect or QD. Arm lockout is removed in preparation for retraction just shortly after T-minus 0. And once we pass T-minus 40 seconds, we do still have the ability to recycle the count under certain conditions back to T-minus 40 seconds, and then hold there to assess what happened and see if we can proceed again back down to T0.
Yeah. There are a couple of things, kind of gates in that timeline that if we pass through that and we hit a hold, we'd have to scrub for the day. One pretty visual one will be if the water starts flowing for that deflector system that's underneath the launch mount. That happens right at around T-minus 10 seconds. For flowing water, we can't turn it off after it starts, and if we hit a hold, we're scrubbed for the day. We would need to refill those water tanks. We would also, at that point, need to refill all of the propellant tanks, as 11 million pounds of propellant is a whole lot. We can typically do that in about 24 hours, so we can always turn around to try again tomorrow. But we are coming up on 3 minutes away from liftoff. We should be hearing that we're closed out of prop load on the ship at this point. Booster coming up shortly.
And wow, the weather just looks amazing there with Starship on the launch pad. Just about 2 minutes and 45 seconds from T0 with a lot of objectives for today. The booster, the Super Heavy booster flying today, will be flying for its 2nd time. Last flight was on Flight 7 and just turned around in 2 flights, which is pretty incredible. I'm super excited to see that booster fly again.
All right, we did just hear we are going to hold at T-minus 40 seconds. So we'll pass along some more information once we hear that reason. But again, that's not the end of the day. We can hold at T-minus 40 seconds for quite a few minutes. We eventually have to start looking at our temperature of all of our propellant on board. That's usually what drives us to, if we've held too long, we have to stand down for the day. So we are expecting a hold at T-minus 40 seconds. Sounds like we're going to be doing some additional checkouts on the booster Raptor while we're at that T-minus 40 second mark. So we will expect to see the clock pause at T-minus 40. And then again, we've got a couple of minutes. They can work through the issues. If we're able to clear them, we can still launch today. If it's something that we can't, we can always stand down, turn around, recycle, fly again tomorrow.
Again, that's really important. This is what terminal count is exactly for, is to be checking the vehicle, monitoring the vehicle systems as it makes its way down to T0. And again, this gives us the ability to catch anything and be able to hold, as Dan has been saying, and recycle if we need to, or pause so that we can work through those issues and see if it's something that we need to stand down for. And as Dan mentioned, we will be holding at T-minus 40 seconds, so in about 20 seconds from now.
Yeah, so we'll hold there, and they'll work through these final checkouts on, sounds like just one of those Raptors on the first stage on Super Heavy, which, as you said, we're reflying it for the first time. 29 of those 33 engines have already been used in a launch, one of which has already launched
twice, and will go for
and
its
is getting ready for its third
time.
Right. And you just heard our flight director for the day, Joe Sliker. He just shared that we are going to hold at this T-minus 40 second mark. Keep an eye on one of those Raptor engines on booster. And if you're just now jumping in, we are holding still at T-minus 40 seconds. Watching one engine, waiting for temperatures to kind of get to a zone that we want them to on one of the engines on the booster, on the Super Heavy booster, getting ready for its second ever flight. So we'll just continue to hold. Again, we can hang out here for several minutes. We held for a while on the first attempt last time, and then cleared it, and then we triggered a different issue on the ground side.
But again, this is exactly what it's for. This gives us the best chances at success.
And the clock is rolling.
There we go.
All right. T-minus 30. Let's listen in. Watch that first flight proven Super Heavy. Get ready to take off from Starbase.
T-minus. About to 1. Hit hold.
We did have a hold. And looks like the clock jumped back to T-minus 40 seconds.
All right, so we jumped out. I did not see the deflector go off. So hopefully we were right at around that T-minus 10 second mark.
And if we were before that T-minus 10 second mark, we do have the ability to recycle, as we mentioned earlier, back to T-minus 40 seconds.
So it looked like this time it was a ground side issue. We're taking a look at this real quick. So again, we're back at T-minus 40. We're gonna hold for a little bit. We are still not scrubbed for the day. Give them a couple of minutes to work through this. Again, we can hang out at T-minus 40 for several minutes. Eventually, we start looking at your bulk temperatures and all of your propellant on board the vehicle. We're not actively replenishing the propellant on board Super Heavy and Starship, and so you don't have essentially forever to hang out before things start to warm up. And you do want to make sure your temperature's in a really stable range for a healthy startup on Raptor engines. So they're going to work through this issue. We can continue to hold here for a couple of minutes. What's launch without a little extra added excitement? All right, so cumulatively, we've held for a little over 3 minutes between the two holds. Again, this is a ground side issue on our tower. The techs are looking through the data right now to see if it's something that we can either work through or if it would cause us to have to stand down. So we're continuing to hang out with them, holding at T-minus 40.
If you're just joining us, we did initially hold at T-minus 40 seconds. We continued the count, but recycled before we got to T-minus 10 seconds. And so we're back at a hold at T-minus 40 seconds, waiting for more information. The team is checking out to see if we can continue today. And we're continuing to hold here at T-minus 40 seconds. We've been holding for just about 5 minutes now as the teams evaluate if we can continue to T0 for Flight 9.
All right, so it sounds like we're coming to a resolution. All right, so we are getting to a resolution. We're going to reset everything. All right, so we're going to see the clock. It is now rolling.
Here we go.
We saw an issue with that quick disconnect to the ship. There is a chance that automation will kick us out again if we encounter the same issue. But for now, the clock is rolling. We'll see if we pass around that T-minus 10 second mark. T-plus 40 seconds, it's one hell of a sight from here. We see it arcing right over top of us. We see 33 out of 33 Raptor engines lit on Super Heavy as it starts to ascend skyward. Coming up on maximum aerodynamic pressure, then only about a minute and a half until we get into hot staging.
Wow, Dan, that was incredible. We could feel the building shaking here, feel the vehicle's power. Now we're just about a minute away from shutting down those engines on the booster. Again, this booster is flying for its second time today.
All right, so hot staging coming up a little under a minute. We're going to see all but the 3 center engines turn off on the booster. So our version of MECO, most engines cut off. And then just a few seconds later, hoping to see 6 engines ignite on ship to push it away. All right, hot staging, about 30 seconds. And definitely keep an eye on which way the booster flips. First ever directional flip we're going for today. Should flip straight up. See those engines powering down?
Booster engine cutoff. Ship ignition. Stage separation.
Incredible flip by Super Heavy Booster, and you can see those 6 engines, those 3 engines on the ship ignited.
6 healthy Raptors running on ship, on its way to space. Peek that engine view. Booster doing the boost back. Chris, how's it looking over there in Hawthorne, man?
It is looking...
Raptor, chamber pressure is nominal.
It is looking absolutely incredible here in Hawthorne. As we said, 6 healthy engines on ship. We've got 13 out of 13 engines on the booster. Now down to those 3, which is what we expect in the final moments of the boost back burn. Now, as a reminder, we are not recovering the Super Heavy booster today. We are instead going to do
booster
some...
boost back, shutdown.
And there we had a good shutdown of the boost back burn. Next up will be the jettison of that hot stage
Ship
ring.
avionics, power and telemetry nominal.
Great call out there that everything looking nominal aboard the Super Heavy vehicle, which is returning to Earth, and we're going to be doing some experiments with it, including a higher angle of attack re-entry, as well as some engine tests as it gets closer to the Gulf. We are, again, because of these tests not recovering it, we are sending it to the Gulf on purpose to do those tests. But again, you see the booster on the left-hand side of your screen. You see ship with 6 healthy engines continuing its ascent to its planned suborbital trajectory. Everything going very well so far for Starship's 9th flight. Now 4 minutes, 15 seconds in. Great views from inside of the aft engine area of ship there, looking at those 3 sea level and 3 Raptor engines on the right-hand side of your screen. The booster doing its LOX dump, that liquid oxygen dump. So because we don't need some of that liquid oxygen propellant in its tanks, we vent that propellant out to lessen the booster's mass as it comes in for its landing. Just absolutely gorgeous views watching these 2 vehicles do their respective things in the skies over Texas here today. And Dan, we're approaching the 5-minute mark into the flight. Super Heavy is descending rapidly. What can we expect here in the next few minutes as it does its atmospheric tests?
Yeah, now as we had talked about, Super Heavy might not have a very smooth ride down. We're going to be putting it through this higher angle of attack. So we're kind of pitching it up a tiny bit, increasing drag. We've done this in wind tunnels. We've done this in computer modeling. It shows that sometimes the control isn't great, but only one way to really prove it out, and that's to get real-world data. So here comes Super Heavy. It should be igniting for its landing burn in just about 40 seconds from now.
And we are going to relight 13 engines, then bring that down to 3 engines. As we talked about earlier, we will be intentionally shutting down. We will be shutting down one of those 3 center engines intentionally to push the limits of the Super Heavy booster.
Ship Raptor, chamber pressure is nominal.
And continuing to see 6 healthy engines on the ship. 3 sea level and 3 vacuum engines still ignited as the Super Heavy booster is making its way back down to Earth.
We can see those grid fins doing some heavy work.
Booster landing, start up.
Ignited for our landing burn. It may have ended with that landing burn. Does look like we lost telemetry from the booster once we started into that landing burn. Did you hear confirmation that the booster did demise? So the booster's flight ending before it was able to get through landing burn, but again, we are not bringing that back. We were expecting it to make a hard splashdown in the Gulf. We were getting live data back the entire time through that high angle of attack flight, so that was something that was really vital for us to get during this reuse. First free flight of booster in the books. All right, ship has about 2 minutes left.
Yeah, in about 2 minutes, we expect all 6 Raptor engines to shut down. That will be SECO, basically second engine or second stage engine shut off. And these are some incredible views, Dan, from the aft end of the ship, watching as the engines stay ignited with the Earth in the background.
As always, the Starship avionics team, the techs. I think we just heard the booster. But, all right, we got about a minute left into this burn. All eyes definitely on ship as we get through the final stages into its ascent. We're expecting it to start to cut those engines off in about 45 seconds.
Terminal guidance.
All right, just about 30 seconds to go. We're in terminal guidance in the final stages of this ascent burn. We did see shutdown of the Raptor engines. We do stagger these, so we do the Raptors first. Those 3 have shut down successfully. Sea levels still running.
Ship engine cut off.
Ship engine cut off, the 3 most beautiful words in the English language.
And great call out that we had nominal insertion. An incredible flight test so far today. We reflew a super heavy booster for the very first time in 9 test flights. Ship is in its orbital trajectory. Again, it's going to remain suborbital for its mission today. But it ignited It ignited all 6 of its engines and made it all the way through SECO just now.
What a moment.
Incredible.
All right, but I mean, that's still lots to come for the rest of this flight. Per usual, I need to collect myself. Hey, Chris, how's it going over there in Hawthorne, man? How's everybody doing?
I think the elation and the excitement and the happiness at what we just saw achieved carried through across all of our sites. What an incredible view to see Starship back orbiting the Earth just under 11 minutes into our mission. Absolutely exciting to see all of this, and super pumped especially to see all of the team's hard work in action here today. As guaranteed, it has been an exciting evening so far for Starship's 9th test flight. We lifted off a little bit after 6:30 p.m. after a couple of holds that were triggered at the T-minus 40-second mark, but we were able to clear those, one on the Raptor, one on the tower, and we were able to lift off successfully from Starbase. 33 out of 33 Raptor engines lit on the Super Heavy, all 6 engines lit on ship, bringing it to its planned suborbital trajectory around Earth. But as Dan said, we've got a lot still coming up in our flight sequence. So coming up at about T plus 18 minutes, 26 seconds, we'll have the first deployment of simulated Starlink satellites planned from Starship. That will be followed at about T plus 37 minutes and 49 seconds by the relight of a single Raptor sea level engine in space. This is going to help us gather data on our ability to do a deorbit burn for future Starship missions that will go orbital. And then, of course, one of the biggest tests yet to come is the new heat shield modifications to Starship. And that'll start with re-entry into Earth's atmosphere at about the T plus 45 minute mark, which should take about 16, 18 minutes to complete. And now today's reentry is going to test that heat shield like we said, specifically how Starship will hold up to 100 missing heat shield tiles on its thermal protection system. Now, we purposely took those 100 tiles off over very critical areas of the vehicle to be able to safely test on a flight like this suborbital trajectory into the Indian Ocean what might happen on an operational flight in those areas if we were to lose the primary heat shield tile over Starship. So very critical test coming up. And then after that, we'll have the final descent where we will again be pushing Starship to its limits. We definitely pushed the booster to its limits today to gather data, and we're going to be doing the exact same thing on that ship, seeing how the ship handles various flight conditions that we will need it to fly in as we look to one day soon bring ships back to Starbase for catch and reuse. Now, while there are payload simulators on Starship for deployment today, as we will see in a few minutes, the primary data and the primary payload for today is the data. And today, just like with Starship's previous test flights, that data is coming to us courtesy of our Starlink network. In fact, it is from Starlink that you are seeing these wonderful views of ship in space right now. So, and I can't wait to see Starlink really provide those epic views and that data transmission during reentry, which is very, very critical to getting that data during reentry. So, Dan and Jesse, it's been an exciting day so far. There's more to come. As we get ready for Starship's first ever payload deploy, what can we expect next here in the next few minutes?
Thanks, Chris. Just going to reiterate, thank you to the Starlink team for these incredible views today. In a few minutes, Starship will deploy 8 Starlink simulators, similar in size to our next generation Starlink satellites. The Starlink simulators will be on the same suborbital trajectory as Starship, meaning they will passively re-enter the atmosphere, just like Starship. With tests like these, we can see how Starship's payload deploy systems work in flight while ensuring that this simulator satellites pose no safety risk to people on Earth or for other satellites in orbit. Now, this also ensures that any parts of these simulator Starlink satellites that do survive reentry splash down harmlessly in the middle of the Indian Ocean.
And then before we get there, though, we're going to have to open up that payload deploy door. So we've only ever done that one time before. Pretty sure it was Flight 3. Someone on the internet, please check me. But that was the only time we ever opened it. And we've had Starlink simulators on the last 2 flights, but we haven't gotten to this moment yet where we're able to open up the payload door and start deploying these. It's going to be pretty cool. We've got them stacked inside of the Starship payload bay, and we'll have potentially a couple of views. You saw one camera pop up. Oh, there we go. Look inside of the payload bay of Starship. You can see them stacked down in the middle of your view. There's kind of 4 on either side, so they're sandwiched on top of each other, a stack of 4 right behind each other. And then we're going to pop the door open. It's on the right side of your screen, so we'll see that open up and then start firing those Starlink simulators out into space.
We are expecting the payload door to open in a little over a minute from now. And then once that payload door is open, about a couple minutes later is when we will start dispensing those Starlink simulators. What a great
right
view.
At the bottom of the stack. So should be able to see them kind of firing out from right there. So really cool. And eventually these are going to carry dozens of the next generation of Starlink satellite into space, and those are going to enable some truly insane things in terms of speeds from space and what we're able to do. Starlink's been really great for Starship, obviously. Getting live video back is really cool, but just the amount of high-speed telemetry, everything we're able to get back is insane. And for a development program, that's kind of everything. We're in excess of 130 or 160. My numbers are fuzzy right now, just like my brain is. But well in excess of 100 megabits per second of downlink. And a lot of that gets eaten up by video. We've got dozens of cameras across Starship. We added several more for this flight. You saw a couple of those as we have essentially 360 degrees. Oh. Open the pod bay door, Hal.
Now we are expecting the payload door to open any moment now, so we're watching out for that. Again, you're looking at the inside of Starship as it's suborbital.
Well, we heard the door open was in progress. It was unable to actuate all the way open, so they are going to close it back up. Hal told me no. He said, I'm sorry, Dan. Can't do that. Looks like we won't get the door open today. But that's okay. This is obviously a test we want to be able to do before we're deploying full-on Starlinks. But the real focus for this, now that we are in space, is getting to that reentry. That is the most critical phase of Starship that we still have to prove out. All right, well, so it does look like we're not going to be able to deploy Starlinks today, but we should have pretty frequent views from Starship. They might cut in and out every once in a while, but should be pretty regular. We are in darkness right now, so might be a lot of black, but the cool part is when we get to reentry, it's going to be daytime.
Yes, and we did that on purpose so that we can get some live daytime views as ship is returning back to Earth.
All right, so we are going to take a break. Enjoy these views as we get them. Enjoy the tunes. We'll be back in a couple of minutes when we get ready to relight one of those Raptor engines on orbit. See you soon. All right, if you're just tuning in, we are about 30 minutes into today's flight test, and the ship is on its suborbital trajectory. As you can see in some of the views and from some of the telemetry, we are in a little bit of a spin. We did spring a leak in some of the fuel tank systems inside of Starship, which a lot of those are used for your attitude control. And so at this point, we've essentially lost our attitude control with Starship. We are still on a path toward re-entry. We are suborbital, so no matter what, we are going to enter. However, this lowers the chances for it to be a controlled re-entry. So if you think back to Flight 3, when we had something similar happen, just the end symptom of a loss of attitude control, we were in a roll by the time we hit re-entry. So we are going to re-enter. We should hopefully still have views. The Starlink satellites are pretty robust to still maintaining contact. We've got 4 of those terminals on the vehicle, and they're pretty robust to maintaining contact even when we are in a spin, essentially. So we should hopefully continue to keep live views. It's going to still be dark until we get a little bit closer to entry, as we are a little bit, we're coming up on Africa. I believe we do swing just to the south of that continent. And by the time we start heading out over the Indian Ocean, we'll start heading into a sunrise. So, not looking great with a lot of our on-orbit objectives for today, where we were hoping to do the PEZ deploy and relight an engine, and then really importantly get into that controlled entry to really put the heat shield through the ringer. Nonetheless, Starship marching forward towards that re-entry over the Indian Ocean, so we'll continue to hang with it and give you any updates as things continue to change. All right, so 36 minutes, 15 seconds into today's flight tests. You're seeing some flat movement here on the ship. If you've been following along, we have essentially lost attitude control on the ship at this point. It is suborbital, so it's still headed to the exact same trajectory as before. We were not able to get that payload door open and deploy those nose cones. We've been dealing with some leaks on the ship. This is also what led to that loss of attitude control. So at this point, we are kind of in a spin, and we are also going to be skipping that Raptor relight. If you've followed through the history of Starship, something similar happened, different cause, but same symptom back on Flight 3, where we weren't able to maintain attitude control in orbit. And so we're going to skip the relight of that Raptor engine while we're in space. We are going to still proceed with entry, but as we are not able to control the attitude of the ship, as we get into entry, it will enter in whatever orientation it is in at the time, which does not bode well for the ship's heat shield, as we're not going to be essentially aligned the way that we want to do for reentry. So it is definitely coming down. It is definitely heading to the Indian Ocean, but our chances of making it all the way down are pretty slim. So we'll still get as much data as we can. We're still getting live telemetry, live views from Starlink the entire time, and we'll continue to stick with ship as it continues on. We are about 10 minutes away or so until we start getting into entry, and the light will start to pick up as we cross the Indian Ocean, and we'll start to see a little bit more daylight, and we'll, as always, as long as we maintain that comm link, get some plasma on the way in and start to bring the Starship back through the Earth's atmosphere. So that coming up in about 10 minutes or so. So we'll check back in with everybody in a little bit. All right, so we are 42 minutes and change into today's flight test. You're seeing the light show start as Starship is getting closer to its reentry. If you're just tuning in, we were able to successfully make it to orbit, run into a couple of issues as we've coasted to our entry point over the Indian Ocean. At this point, we had lost attitude control of the ship and entered into a spin. The team made the call.
Good afternoon, Space Fam, and welcome to Starbase. I'm Jesse Anderson, a Senior Production Engineering Manager at SpaceX.
And I'm Dan Hewitt with SpaceX Communications. Awesome to have you with us here in Texas, Jesse. Welcome to Starbase. First time, right?
Thank you so much, Dan. Yeah, my first time here, and it is mind-blowing. I went out to the pad this morning, and the scale of the vehicle is just insane.
Dwarfs everything.
And for those of you watching at home, in case you missed the news, Starbase is no longer just a cool name. It is now officially an incorporated city in Texas, and we'll have more on that a little bit later today.
Yeah, right now, though, we are counting down to Starship's 9th flight test, currently targeting the very start of our window at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. Good news right up front, not tracking any issues with the vehicle. Weather is gorgeous out there right now. Rain this morning, little bit of wind, nothing now, nothing to worry about. Looking good for a launch.
Starship development is moving quickly here at Starbase. So fast, in fact, that we already are reflying the Super Heavy booster today, which last flew on Flight 7. The primary objectives for today are very similar to our last two attempts, except for the booster, which, in addition to flying for the second time, has an exciting return journey planned for its return back to Earth.
That's right. It's going to be getting some serious rigor, and pretty important, we are not going to be attempting to catch the booster today. We're going to use this launch to kind of further accelerate the development. We're putting Super Heavy kind of through the ringer, some serious rigor. We're going to go through all of that in just a couple of minutes. We're also hoping to get Ship into space, and it's got a couple of objectives like deploying simulated Starlink satellites and then a range of experiments during its reentry. We're really trying to test the limits, the capabilities of that heat shield, the flaps, the structure, everything about it. Primary payload on this flight, once again, as always, is data.
It's definitely a very big day for both stages. There's always a chance we don't reach every objective that we set for ourselves, but success comes from what we learn on days like today. And of course, whatever happens, excitement is guaranteed.
Yeah, that's right. Progress is not measured by single flight tests. It's whatever that timeline overall is, and getting us closer to establishing self-sustaining civilization on Mars, making life multiplanetary. Every time we're learning something from these flights that will get us there, that is progress.
Exactly. Starship is the first orbital launch vehicle engineered to be fully reusable and built for frequent flight and heavy payloads, just like today's commercial airliners.
It's the product of years of rapid development, testing, iteration. We're trying to fly as frequently as possible, fix problems as they appear, and then fly again. It all started here at Starbase back with Starhopper. It was a small single Raptor prototype. Kind of looked like a water tower. We turned it into a water tower eventually. It made its first low-altitude hop back in 2019 here at Starbase. You could tell the pad, that's the pad that we were just looking at. It looks dramatically different now, two towers. But Starhopper delivered. It was able to prove that we could use that Raptor engine for controlled takeoff and landing.
And that is so wild to see that there on your screen was just 6 years ago, and now we're here today with a full-size vehicle. So from there, we moved to full-size test articles with increasingly complex test flights that reached progressively higher altitudes. And each test shaped the Starship that we see today on the pad, a stronger, taller, and more refined vehicle.
That's right. All right. Now, let's go out there and meet it. Starship is made up of two parts. First, on the bottom, the Super Heavy booster, powered by 33 Raptor engines. Both Super Heavy and Ship are running on liquid methane and liquid oxygen. That second stage, the Starship upper stage, is powered by 6 of those Raptor engines. 3 of them are optimized to sea level performance, 3 for vacuum, so operating while they're in space. And here's a quick look under the hood at all of those Raptors. On the left, that's a view from underneath the launch mount. That's 33 Raptor engines on the first stage, on the booster. And on the right, that's a view inside of the ship. So you're looking down at the top of the booster at 6 Raptor engines inside the ship. Those are what's going to power it to orbit. Now, that second stage is also what will one day carry cargo, payloads, people, everything that's going to space. It's also going to be responsible for in-space propellant transfer. That's where we're going to take two Starships, meet them up in orbit. One will be able to transfer propellant to the other. That's a really critical capability for Starship to do all of these missions beyond low Earth orbit. It also unlocks our ability to send huge amounts of cargo, tremendous amounts of people to destinations far beyond Earth.
Yeah, the Super Heavy booster is designed to launch, separate, flip, and return to the launch site where it can be caught by the chopsticks on the launch tower. Though, as we mentioned earlier, we are not attempting a booster catch today on Flight 9. Starship re-enters the Earth's atmosphere at the conclusion of its mission, steering itself to a vertical landing or catch. And both stages are designed to return to Earth and fly again, making this the first rocket in history that will be fully reusable.
And then just in between the two vehicles is what's known as the hot stage ring. That's a steel structure that really takes the brunt of those ship engines as they ignite, protecting the booster while the ship's still attached to it. That enables us to do hot staging. It's faster, more efficient, and kind of shutting everything down and then reigniting. Right now, that hot stage it's single use. It detaches from the booster as it flies back. But in the future, it's going to be integrated right into the top. And then on top of all of that, there's all of the infrastructure that's built up around it to support Starship. We call it Stage 0. That's everything, the launch pads, the propellant farm, launch towers, chopsticks that are catching the booster out of the air, stacking the ship, all of that. And you may have noticed we have a new addition out there near the pad. The orbital launch mount for Pad 2 has officially been installed. That's starting to come together. Just like Pad 1, Pad 2 has a launch mount. That's where you're going to put Super Heavy on top. We also have a launch tower with arms, a little bit shorter on that one. That's going to be used to stack the Starship on top, put the booster on top, catch the booster, catch the Starship. We did put the orbital launch mount on there. That's responsible for routing all of the propellant to the booster ahead of flight. Underneath it, you've got flame deflectors, the water deluge system to disperse all of those forces. The single piece we just lifted in weighs about 1,060 metric tons, which, if you're keeping score at home, that's the same weight as about 10 Millennium Falcons. It's heavy.
That's a lot of Millennium Falcons, Dan.
So many.
We're also currently in work on Starship's brand new pad at Kennedy Space Center's Launch Complex 39A, and we're hoping to bring that online later this year as well. Tons of progress with Starship so far in 2025, and lots of incredible milestones still coming up. And we are still on track to lift off tonight at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. And right now, it's time to say hi to Chris, who's over there repping the West Coast Ops today. How's it going, Chris?
Hey, Jesse and Dan, and welcome everyone to West Coast and Hawthorne, California. As you can see behind me, the crowd is gathering outside of our mission control room here in Hawthorne, and the excitement is really palpable as we continue to count down toward Starship's 9th flight test. Now, our mission control room here in Hawthorne usually serves as the mission control room for our Falcon and Dragon missions once they launch from Florida and California. Now, with Starship, all countdown and mission control operations actually use the same flight control team from the same location at Starbase, which you can see on your screen now. But as we develop a vehicle like Starship, we want as many experts watching over its various systems as we can. And that's what we use the mission control room here in Hawthorne for during Starship flight tests like today's. The folks in mission control, which you see now on your screen, are the responsible engineers for Starship's various systems. This includes things like booster systems, stage propellant, our ground stations, flight software, the loads, and the vehicle structures as well. And having this support gives the flight teams in Starbase immediate access to our engineers' knowledge, which is really, really important when we're making informed decisions very quickly in a test program like this. This setup has been great for Starship flight tests so far, as we've handled things like propellant temperature differences, as well as day of launch winds that can affect the loads placed on Starship structures during launch, and particularly during the descent of the Super Heavy booster back to Earth. So having all of these responsible engineers ready to support is crucial during Starship testing, where we place hardware in flight conditions quickly to iterate and make the best and most reliable rocket that we can. So it's definitely a full house, a growing full house here in Hawthorne for our 9th flight of Starship today. Every flight brings us a step closer to a future where Starship is flying multiple times a day. And I'm sure you all feel the same way down there in Texas, Dan and Jesse, but I can't wait to see Starship's launch today. How about you?
Yeah, can't wait to see it, Chris. As you can see, props loading on the vehicle is just a little under 2 miles away from us, and we're really excited. looking back real quick. So back in March, Starship's 8th flight test saw us catch the Super Heavy booster for the 3rd time ever. Another big step on that path to full and rapid reusability. Unfortunately, the Starship upper stage did experience what we call a rapid, unscheduled disassembly before it finished its climb to space, which meant we didn't reach all of those additional mission objectives that we had set.
About 5.5 minutes into ship's ascent burn, a hardware failure in one of its sea-level Raptor engines took out that engine, the 2 remaining sea-level engines, and a Raptor vacuum engine. That's 4 of the 6 engines that ship has. This was a different failure than we saw on Flight 7, and the fixes that we put in place did work as expected. So
to assist with anything like debris cleanup, we coordinate with all the necessary parties, organizations, administrations for safety in advance and in an ongoing basis during our test campaigns to plan for as many possible outcomes. Definitely do want to say thank you, though, to the people of the Bahamas, the government of the Bahamas, who worked with us so closely since Flight 8.
We took full responsibility for the cleanup, and in doing so, we had people on the ground in the Bahamas within 12 hours to help with debris recovery. So all that said, we're moving forward in our development cycle with safety at the top of mind, and we fly again today to get this current iteration of ship to space and back.
That's right. Putting hardware in a flight environment as frequently as possible, so you're seeing how things behave all together in the real world. Then you're solving problems as they pop up. That's how SpaceX developed their very first rocket, Falcon 1. Same philosophy was used to develop Falcon 9.
Today, we're looking to get our first re-entry with the latest iteration of ship, while intentionally stressing the Super Heavy vehicle during its return to get data on its boundaries. And by stressing, we mean that we'll be pushing the flight envelope of Super Heavy as we fly at a higher angle of attack during descent towards the Gulf. Angle of attack in this case means that Super Heavy is pitched up to maximize drag and slow return. Because of this test, we will not be attempting to catch and recover Super Heavy, which again is flying for its 2nd time today. So for a brief moment, this booster will hold the title as the Super Heavy flight leader.
That's right. All right. Lot still ahead for today. Let's get into it real quick with this overview. As always, everything starts with a liftoff. 33 Raptor engines igniting. Super Heavy pushing itself and Starship into ascent over the Gulf. It's going to continue for about 2.5 minutes before we get to hot staging. Ship will ignite its engines. Booster will do its boost back burn and begin its flight experiments back for a hard splashdown in the Gulf of America. Meanwhile, ship continues its burn into space.
And ship will remain suborbital. We will be deploying 8 Starlink simulator satellites and then head towards re-entry. We'll relight a Raptor engine as well as test experiments during re-entry, such as missing tiles, metallic tiles, loading the vehicle's flaps, and then ship will attempt a flip maneuver, and if all goes planned, we'll conclude the test with a soft water splashdown in the Indian Ocean. So that's what we have on the menu for Flight 9 today.
Whole lot.
Flight 8's RUD taught us new lessons about Starship hardware, specifically the Raptor engines. And as we touched on earlier, the root cause was traced to a hardware failure in one of Starship's 3 center Raptor engines.
Yeah, just since that flight, we've done more than 100 long-duration Raptor tests at our facility in McGregor. Huge shout-out to that team for really putting in the work to better understand what happened. As a result, the engines that are on Starship's upper stage on the pad right behind us have a few changes. One of the key ones we did was additional preload on some of the joints, essentially some additional torquing, a new nitrogen purge system for the engines themselves, and made some improvements to the propellant drain system.
After our first ever Super Heavy refurb campaign, we static fired with all 33 Raptor engines. This was a chance to see all the hardware operating together, and for this flight, our teams had an opportunity to make adjustments or hardware replacements for this first ever reflight of the Super Heavy booster.
And then it was ship's turn. We took it through several static fires. First, we did this short duration single engine burn to simulate an in-space reignition of Raptor using those header tanks, those smaller tanks up in the nose cone. We also completed a longer duration 60-second burn with all 6 engines. So where you're really putting the entire propulsion system that's going to be used for the ship's ascent into space through the paces, making sure everything's working together before we go stack it on the pad.
And in the end, these changes represent the core of our test program. And reflying a booster for the first time is a major milestone, especially so early in the flight test program. Now, Falcon did it in just over 30 flights.
And Starship's doing it today on just its 9th flight. It's not wild just because of how much faster that is, but just how much bigger Starship is. Falcon 9 can lift about 23 metric tons into orbit. Starship is designed to lift 200.
That is so exciting. And on top of that, we're also reflying engine 314 for its 3rd flight, which you might recall is the engine with a pie on the nozzle. And there you can see that engine there. It is a milestone, most definitely, but we do remain focused on getting to the point where no refurbishment is needed between any of the flights.
Yeah, that means we want to launch it, bring it back, look at it, reload propellants, go again. That is really what's key. That is what full and rapid reusability will look like.
We're coming to you today from Star Factory, our new 1 million square foot manufacturing facility in Starbase, Texas. The Super Heavy booster is the first stage of the Starship launch vehicle stack. It's the largest boost stage ever developed for any rocket ever. Having the largest rocket ever is a very cool engineering feat, but the thing that really makes a difference is the ability to rapidly reuse that rocket to launch many other missions. Reflying Booster 14 is an important first milestone in that we have proven that we can recover a vehicle, turn it around, and fly it a second time. But it's not a victory lap yet.
From an operational perspective, an ideal state looks like a vehicle where very few things have to happen on it in order to take back off again. So we catch the vehicle, put it back onto the launch mount, put a new ship back on top with its payload, refuel, and take back off. And that same booster will come back to the launch mount, and we do the same thing all over again. Falcon is, reusing at a pretty high rate, and we get to go look at them and say, what did you learn? What is good? What is bad? And as we continue to build the Starship process.
Zero-touch refurbishment really looks like a commercial airliner. The advantage we have on Booster relative to when we developed Falcon 9, for instance, is this was really designed from the outset for rapid reusability.
We're using all of the flight test learnings from our version 1 and version 2 vehicles in our orbital flight test campaign to inform the design of our version 3 vehicle.
The next generation vehicle will be the first time that we've really attempted to make rapidly reusable thermal protection on a rocket. In the next iteration, we'll be able to add in new innovative materials and regenerative cooling that will enable rapid zero-touch refurbishment.
Rapid reusability, the ability to fly, turn the vehicle around, and refly again immediately is really the key goal of the Starship program.
It is so cool to see our teams working together as Starship is learning from Falcon with reusability, and now we're seeing Starship do the same thing today. So all eyes on the rocket on the pad, getting ready to launch in just about 17 minutes from now.
That's right. Looking at our levels real quick, we're a little bit more than halfway full on fuel and LOX on the booster, over 80% full on the ship, so we'll have to fill those header tanks. But everything looking good. We're not tracking any issues on the range. As a reminder, we watch sea states, air, and land around the launch site here and also over in the Indian Ocean where we're going to be doing our reentry. Not tracking any blockers to launch at the moment. Weather is gorgeous, has not been a concern all day for launch. We've been moving through all of our pre-flight checkouts pretty smoothly so far this morning, getting the ship and the booster ready for prop load, making sure guidance, navigation, and control are aligned. Everything's ready to go. You can see with the frost coming off, we're getting pretty full. We started loading all of the propellants on board both ships about 45 minutes or so before launch. They kind of stagger where we start with ship and then move into booster. We're going to continue loading these propellants on board until just about 3 minutes before liftoff. We'll close out on the ship first and then on the booster. But bottom line, everything's looking great. Not tracking any vehicle issues, range issues, weather issues. We're looking really good right now for a launch at the top of our window right at 6:30 p.m. Central.
Yeah, seeing the propellant loading is making this getting more and more exciting. Today is going to be a wild ride for Super Heavy. We're putting the booster through several tests to expand the envelope on its capabilities and get flight data to make its return and catch more reliable. Now, another unique change in today's flight will be the addition of the first ever directional flip of the booster.
That's right. If you followed previous flights and you kind of wonder to yourself, why does the direction of the booster flip seem random? Surprise, it's because it was. We've got a couple of views from previous flights where you'll see the booster kind of go in